All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Erin, thank you so much for being here. Can you please do us the honor of telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, your work as a writer, and I want to know what your relationship with art is, both visual or either visual and literary. I want to ask this question because I've been listening to a podcast called Normal Gossip, and they always ask their guests, what is your relationship with gossip? So I'm just loving this overall question. What is your relationship with art?
Okay, cool beans. So yeah, I forgot the first part of the question. Um, and I heard the last, so I'll answer the last part. My relationship with art is, one of the first jobs that I got when I graduated from college was I worked at the Philbrook Museum here in Tulsa. And I wasn't really, like, I liked going to museums and I kind of like browsing, but I hadn't really gone to museums like as a regular thing that I enjoyed doing until I was in undergraduate, until I was like in my final year of undergraduate. And I had this intro to art class because it was like one of the last classes that I needed to graduate. And I just kept putting it off and off and off. But I had a really good TA, and she asked this question, how do things mean? And once she said that, like everything kind of clicked in an art museum, and I just started going and going and going. And then I just started making it a regular practice to go see, art installations in Tulsa, hanging out at AHA, and getting a membership at the Philbrook, and just going to the different art things in Tulsa. Um, so yeah.
That's awesome. So, in terms of now, what are you doing as a writer? Would you mind telling the listeners a little bit more about your practice and speak to kind of why we wanted to have you on the podcast today, just as a woman of many talents?
Aw, thanks. So I call myself a writer, but what I write has changed so much over the years. So I self-published my first novel last year around this time, but I also published a lot of speculative short stories traditionally online through short fiction markets and other sorts of things like that. Um, so to me, I have always wanted to write something that is fun, vivid, powerfully emotional, and something that like you just keep thinking about long after you finished reading it, and it changes the way you think about the world, and just has changed and how it changes for you over time. And my writing practice, I think, is me. I see myself as testing that hypothesis that reading and writing can be a transformative act. Um, so how I do that is like I treat stupid questions very seriously. So, or I do. For example, like one of the stories that kind of got traction online as I started out with TikTok is that I there was a viral green text from 4chan called like the shopping cart theory, and I thought that was fascinating. And I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I wrote a short story about it, and it got published in this very tiny like science fiction magazine. And then it just kind of like after like two or three people told me it was great, and then this like everything died down, and then I got on TikTok, and then I made this post about how I made a short story about that, and that's when I started getting traction. Um, so I feel like because of that, I am kind of getting to where I need to be, where I'm getting the kind of feedback that I've always sought, which is that I'm on the right path to creating the kinds of things I like. So as far as like the visual goes, I guess I always start with a very strong image. And art is a really good way of finding strong images, because you like it's usually static. You see it right there in front of you in a museum. It's usually made out of a material, and it's got texture, and it's got a physical place in the world, and people interact with it. And it's just like, and it doesn't do anything, but it sits there, and like people, and if it's good art or great art, people will be drawn to it naturally. And those are really good starting places for like ideas and prompts that I think about when I write.
I love that. I think another reason too why I kind of wanted to start off with this question about your relationship with art
Mm-hmm.
is because the magic of behind the scenes art pop talk, when we bring on a special guest, we like to ask them a series of questions and really ask our guests what they're interested in talking about. And one of the things that you brought up that you want to talk about was an artist by the name of Julie Alpert.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the privilege of actually working on one of her exhibitions as a tour guide and as a programmer when I worked at a local arts institution in Tulsa.
Oh.
She is a really fantastic artist, is actually killing it. She recently has an exhibition up at Crystal Bridges Museum of Art, which is 10 times the size of the work of art that I worked with. A smaller installation, I should say. So, Julie is also very interesting because she has a partnered relationship within her practice, and she is married to another artist by the name of Andy Arkley, and who's another artist that I did programming on. So when you brought up this artist, I was just really excited to talk about them because I've been fascinated by this idea of partnership within the arts community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of working relationship. And I know that Bianca and I have some questions for you later on about your kind of working relationship with your illustrators for your young adult fiction books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am just really curious about what draws you to Albert's work because she really pulls off of personal experience symbolism,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a real visual and symbolic language that is inherently present within her work. So I'm just curious if those are some things that you're interested in and if you can speak to her work a little bit more. Let's get an Erin analysis on Albert's work.
Maybe. I mean, I found her completely by accident. I went to the first Friday for September and I was like, you know what? I'll go to check out what's at AHA. And I saw like their exhibition was called Sticker Book, and I normally don't like to like go in and like spend money just frivolously, but I was like, sure, I can pay $10 to go see it because I like stationery. Like I had no frame of reference for her work. I'd never heard of her before, but I was like, yeah, stickers, I love those. And I actually got one of the sticker book things that she didn't put this out. The museum where AHA put it out, they made it like based on her work. I haven't used it because I haven't decided where I'm going to put the stickers yet, but it's there. But then when I went in, I was really drawn to her work, and I've never like decided to like, or I've never wanted or had the urge to like buy like something from a collection that's just presented there. But I asked the curators about that after the exhibition because I was just like, I don't know, I just something about it. I don't. I guess part of it was like the allure of stationery, right? It's mostly like miscellany around a theme. Um, and with stationery, especially with sticker books, it's kind of like I kind of think of it as like being a bowerbird and you're like decorating your nest with like things you haven't made to showcase who you would like to present yourself as to other people. Usually to not like a bird and trying to get like sex from other female birds, but like, you know, you're trying to present yourself to the world, right? So like, and stickers are just kind of that thing, right? With Alpert's work, one of the things that I really noticed was how many like eyes are in her work, especially in like the center of the installations, right? One of the ones that really struck me was like this huge thing. It's probably bigger than my apartment wall. And it's just like this board covered in like frilled paper. And it's got like these designs and repeating patterns of like bows and hearts. And at the center, it's got eyes that look like the ones in the sticker book. And it just like the color and like the layered frills and everything, it just kind of feels like it's vibrating or radiating out of the board. So it's like this very intensely girly, frilly, colorful thing, almost monstrous. So I really like. I didn't even think about the symbolism to that. I just thought it was cool. Um, when I was a beginning writer, I was more in love with the symbols and like what it all meant than actually giving my like audience a good time. So I feel like she's kind of like attained this kind of thing that I would like to reach, which is that, you know, the clear use of symbols, but also in a way that's really accessible and fun and really cool looking. Like, we all want to be cool looking. I can't help it.
Okay, well, you are definitely very cool. That's
Yes.
why you were asked to come on our Pop Talk. So we can definitely give credit to Erin's coolness factor.
Yay.
Um, I do really loved how you kind of described the monstrosity of Alpert's work because it is so extremely girly and it is very, things are blown up. She does a lot of paintings on board.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of bows, there's eyes. So there's like figurative imagery and there's other kind of tangible, symbolic imagery.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of describing that as monstrous, I haven't heard that word in relation to her work, but I think that's just completely astute. I think, just in terms of your work as a writer, I'm curious that you were drawn to the kind of programmatic element of this exhibition. And I'm curious in terms of writing or didactics, like these are things that Bianca and I are interested in for the museum goer
Mm-hmm.
experience. Do you find that as a writer now you are kind of drawn to paying attention to that information, or are you just inclined to that as just a museum goer?
No, that's usually like the first thing I read because not just because I like to read, but because it helps orientate me to like whoever is being displayed or whatever. I don't usually plan museum trips. It's usually like, oh, I'm in the area. I might as well drop in on a museum. It's usually like spontaneous. I don't mark on my calendar when there's an exhibit unless it's something like really big, like the Frida Kahlo exhibit. I went with my mom and I marked the dates because I wanted to make sure we would be able to go without like I don't know missing it. But that's very rare for me to actually like plan it. But I do, and it's funny you should bring up those little like I can't remember what they're called placards. Those little
Placards, didactics, labels.
didactics. Yeah, one of the other first jobs that I had when I came back to Tulsa after college was I was a freelance assistant to this artist who or this photographer who was always submitting her work to places downtown to be judged for things, and one of my jobs for her was actually writing them. She was a horrible person, and I
Oh,
quit in
wow.
like a month, but I used to do it.
Okay, that is really cool. We have not had a writer on the podcast to talk about that working relationship and to do that kind of work for an artist, but that is very common. I think so often, like Bianca and I talk about so much, okay, like when you see like a stupid Jeff Koons sculpture, just know that like lots of people worked on this, but we don't really emphasize the fact that also that comes with other programmatic elements, that comes with
Mhm.
writing, and all types of other things. Like it is a workshop and a roundabout experience. So how long did you do that for? You said like a month.
Like a month. She was horrible, and I don't want to get into the details because she lives and works in Tulsa still, and she might listen to this podcast. But I knew I had to end my employment with her when I didn't have a nightmare because I wasn't afraid, but it made me intensely angry. Like,
Mm.
and I was like, I woke up pissed and like at like 4 a.m. and I went to my desk and just started writing all these reasons why I hated her. And I was like, and at the end of it, I had like all the proof I needed that I just needed to get away from her. And then later I found out that other people had the same experience with her about her treating them poorly, especially in like the different artist spaces that I frequent. And I was like, do you know how bad you have to be to piss off an entire community of artists? Like, it was just,
Apparently not, because there have been quite a few artists in our community lately who have turned out to be just horrible, terrible people. And, I'm sure that there's like local tea like that in all sorts of
mhm.
places. But as we also like to, like, there are terrible people in all facets of industries, and we are absolutely no exception. So we won't make you call anyone out on the pod, but we do love the tea.
Yeah, she was pretty bad. I keep thinking about making her a villain in a short story, but I just don't have like the right story for her yet. But do I really want to immortalize her like that? I don't know. She was pretty
Ooh,
bad.
that's such a profound question. Like, I really want to get my feelings out, but at the same time, like, will this live forever? That's
Yeah,
hilarious.
exactly.
Um, Erin, I want to ask you this next question, but you said something that really fascinated me about your writing process, that you used to kind of get caught up in the symbolism rather than giving people a good time.
Hmm.
And that's something that I really have not heard from a writer. And I think it's so refreshing because I think the same thing goes for facets of visual culture as well. Art doesn't always have to be profound and full of symbols. Like, it still can, and that's wonderful, but people can always appreciate it for purely just the joy and experience and the ride. Like, oh, I'm experiencing this thing in front of me and this feels really good and I'm enjoying it and I don't have to look that deeper. And that's something that I really struggled with whenever I was in high school, was taking all these English classes and not really understanding why I had to feel the deep, like, poetic that's actually why I'm not super fond of poetry in general. It's like, I don't like having to hunt in my literature for all these deep feelings, and it's weird because I experience that differently when I do encounter works of visual art. But I just found it so refreshing. I really just loved what you said there. I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that sentiment a little bit more.
Of course, and I have been thinking about it a lot recently because I realized something. One of the things that I use TikTok for is I review books on writing and storytelling. And it was kind of like, at first I was just going to do books on writing, but I also had a lot of books on storytelling. And I was like, you know what? I'll just start rereading everything and I'll start like picking up more books and it'll help me become a better writer and it'll also
Mm-hmm.
help people. And that's how I started to get a lot more traction too. But
Mm.
one of the things that it made me realize as I was reading these books and like condensing their information and presenting it to people was that I was a good writer, but I was not a good storyteller.
Mm.
And as I started like going back and thinking about it, like when I started to become a writer, like I didn't really know what I was doing and I was just having a lot of fun. And I
Mm-hmm.
read some of the old stuff that I used to write, like the really early stuff, and like I don't hate it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
cringy. It's like you can tell that the girl who wrote that stuff is really smart and funny and uses a lot of big words, a lot of adjectives and adverbs, like 4 or 5 in a row, that you would have to look up in a dictionary. But it wasn't terrible. The writing
Mm-hmm.
was terrible, but the story was interesting because she found it fun to write, and you could just tell.
Mm-hmm.
But then I
Mm.
would read stuff that I wrote in college, and it was like terrible. It was you could tell that the person who wrote those stories was trying to be a writer. She knew more about
Yeah.
writing, but the fun was gone and she was trying to like be something that she didn't enjoy because she thought she was trying to write something that a story had to be. She was enjoying the smugness of knowing what a story had to be and like was contemptuous of the reader because if they didn't get
Mm-hmm.
it, that was their fault for not knowing things. But that's a
Mm-hmm.
really bad way that's a really easy way actually to piss off your audience and to make sure nobody ever reads your work is to make them hate you because they
Oh,
feel like they can't get you. um
yeah.
so yeah, I feel that, and I feel like there's a couple of things that have kind of shaken me out of it, which is one, being a better storyteller and being on TikTok, because writing is a medium, but storytelling is a pattern, and you can
Mm-hmm.
storytell through many different types of medium. You can do it through art, like Julie did with Sticker Book. Like if you actually deconstruct the art that she does, you can kind of feel that she's telling a story about what kind of person she presents herself to be. You can storytell through data. One of the first viral TikToks that I did was about a book called Storytelling with Data,
Mm.
which made sense. There was another book by the Moth that just came out, and they're actually doing an event in like 2 weeks. And they just use nothing but their voice. You can take note cards and you can like read your notes sometimes, but when
Mm.
you get up on stage, you just have to tell it to people straight. There's no writing involved.
Mm-hmm.
So like once I realized that they're separate things, then I realized I had been identifying way too much as a writer and not as much as a storyteller. And once I started like actually focusing more on the story and not so much on the writing, I liked my own work a lot better, and people started to really respond to it.
Yeah,
So yeah, I
I
feel like
love
the
that.
symbolism in English class is kind of like a holdover of like a particular genre in writing.
Oh yeah.
Like I think romantic symbolism is what it's called. I hated
Yeah,
it. So
I mean, there's just so much that transfers over to any type of, I think, kind of liberal arts academia. And for a high schooler who was just struggling with like the deeper meaning of some like Emerson or what did I just say?
it fits.
Ralph Waldo Emerson. My partner works at Emerson College, and for some reason, when I said that name out loud, I was like, "Why did I just say that?" But that's right. Um, like reading these poems that I wasn't connecting with on a personal level, and then trying to find this like, deeper message, which is the same thing. Like people don't, or some people can find the experience of going to an art museum really taxing because they're forced to connect with something that one they don't understand, and two that doesn't mean anything to them. Like the deeper symbols does aren't going to relate with every person. You can tell those facts to people, but it's not always going to resonate in the same way. So I really appreciate how you have kind of analyzed that and laid that out for us. So you started talking about TikTok a little bit. So I want to ask you a TikTok question that we had. Gianna and I are always fascinated by people who can simultaneously create things and artworks and literary masterpieces while also promoting a business at the same time, because it is so much work to not only do the production but then promote it and manage all of it at the same time. So book talk has become this integral part of the TikTok platform, and I think it's really reinvigorated book and literary culture into this digital age. Whenever you go to any bookstore now in person, they always have this section now that's just book talk, and I find myself gravitating towards that section, like, oh, this is something that like my peers are into. It's something that lots of like it's entering a physical part of this online conversation, I think, when you go into a store and like see this book talk section. So can you share with us how you are using the platform? I know you touched on it a little bit, but what does TikTok do for you and your kind of creations?
Yeah. So I use TikTok for like four things. The first thing, and the thing that I'm trying to do the most, are those reviews about books, reviews on books about writing and storytelling. And then I have just the books that I review, just like I read this book. I thought it was cool. Here's why you should read it too. And meanwhile, I will also get better at like pitching this book to you and making it look good and sound good, and learn a little bit more about how book marketing works. Um, and then the other two things I do is I promote my own work, and I give tips on how other people can do what I do, like time tracking, editing, getting your book self-published, and what it's like working with authors and editors and illustrators and marketing, and getting your short fiction ready to go on a magazine, and like what is it like to publish in a short fiction magazine, and what can you do with a short story afterwards. um, so for me, like I said earlier, TikTok has been really good for me because it's given me another outlet to be creative and to practice being a storyteller without the burden of being like about caring about the medium too much. Like I care about TikTok, I care about having fun and doing a good job and getting people to follow me, but I also don't care too much because that's not the thing that I like. I don't know. When I was a little kid, like I knew I would be a writer one day, and I just like knew it. Like I knew the sun would rise and fall every day. I knew the moon would come up and sundown, and I knew I would be a writer. That was just, I can't really explain it. I just like doing it, and that's what I'm going to do. It's not deeper than that. But TikTok, I was like, I don't really. I don't care as much. There's not that emotional attachment to TikTok the way that I have for writing. So in one way, it's kind of a relief to do it there and to create there because I don't have as much pressure on myself to be good. But it's been really helpful in understanding like this side of book talk and how people buy books. Like you said, I'm glad you brought up the table at the bookstore for book talk because I'm of course on book talk and I'm always analyzing how other creators like market their books or how book reviewers like show off like books they got, like their book hauls, their shelves, their like fairy lights over their bed or whatever. And what I've really learned about book marketing is one, publishers and authors are really bad at it. And two, book reviewers seem to take books as like this lifestyle thing rather than like an academic or literary thing. People who use books as like, or who talk about books like seriously, like as an academic thing about their ideas and stuff, they're like, they by and far have much fewer followers than people who post like their giant book hauls or like their bookshelves with like hardback covers of every new YA fantasy romance thing that has come out. Limited edition, of course. But that's the name of things. People are attracted to visual stuff, and you know, people say don't judge a book by its cover. What else do we have to go by? Like, think about how you discover a book, right? Like, you have to read like a snippet online, or you have to maybe you hear something about the author and you trust that whatever they have to say, they're a funny person, they're intelligent. Of course I'll go buy their book because they'll say more funny and intelligent things in this book and I'll probably enjoy it. But like, how else do you do it? By word of mouth or by looking at the book cover and being like, that's the thing for me, you know? Um, and I think publishers and authors are really bad at marketing their own books because they're just kind of like presenting the books as like, hey, you need to read this because it's about da da da. And if, but they don't really do anything else. They just like, it's not visually interesting. It doesn't speak, books speak to people. I think, no, let me go back because I just learned this and I'm fascinated by it. One of the things I learned about marketing isn't just that, you know, when you sell a product, you have to address people's pleasure points and you have to trust people and you have to address people's pain points. You can do like a little bit of both. You can do one or the other. But you can also position something to speak to who that person wants to be. And if they buy this thing, then they will become closer to that person.
That makes absolute sense. I work as a content creator now, and
Ah,
exactly what you're speaking to is like the things that I am figuring out how to navigate on a daily basis, but through different images. Like it's the same thing, but I want to make it fun and I want to make it relevant because we know in general, and exactly what you're speaking to with how book marketing works in general, how people talk about things on book talk. No one wants to go to book talk and get a lecture. And I think the most organic and fun conversations have when people are natural and they're, you know, of course there are influencers and there are people who get paid to, you know, market that kind of thing online. But those organic conversations and those stimulating conversations are the one that people resonate with the most,
mhm.
not a lecture like you should buy this product. It's like, hey, how about we talk about something completely different? Like I popped a Zoolander meme into this like report I'm working on because the only thing I could think about writing this was Zoolander, and I hope that people relate to that as well. So
Yeah,
it absolutely, the translation, it just runs across the board.
exactly. One of the, and that's, it's funny you brought that up because like, do you follow like the sad beige lady who does like that? Okay, so the sad, I don't remember her actual TikTok handle
I
name,
just,
but
I
like,
just
Tell us
love this
more.
description.
I don't remember her actual handle, but like her thing is she starts every video with like this German accent mimicking Werner Herzog and says, "Welcome to Werner Herzog's new line of children's clothing, sad beige clothes for sad beige children. And it's like she's responding to something that's really
amazing.
I know, she's amazing. She's so funny and I've learned a lot from her. But like what she does is she has noticed that a lot of children's clothing nowadays, and especially in like the upper class, like Pottery Barn, I don't have kids.
Does Pottery Barn make children's clothes?
I don't know. But like Pottery
J.
Barn, like
Crew
the
Bibis.
aesthetic is like neutrals and natural wood and like plain stone colored things, and just like there's not a lot of color in these children's clothes and toys and books. And it's just like she making fun of that, because like color is actually important to children developing. And there's like something called like, oh gosh, this was another thing I learned on TikTok. Like chromophobia is actually like this thing that you find, especially in the upper class, because color is seen as like an ethnic thing and a socioeconomic thing that they don't want to be associated with.
Damn.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Holy shit.
I do think about like how baby toys, I feel like, are made to be very like aesthetic. Like they're made of like raw like wood, and because we want to make the things in our house as aesthetically pleasing as we can, we want to try to have that control over it to a certain point, to where like the kid's going to reach 3-year-olds and then you're going to get a bunch of plastic toys that are colorful and make all the noise because they have to develop those sensory things. And but you'll notice a transition in like the toy aisle at Target, like, you know, baby, you know, 1 to 5 month old, it's all very like, ooh, look at this like little wooden giraffe that we whittled like vibe. And then you get to like the plastic saxophone with all the buttons when they're like 3 years old.
All I can
It's very
think about
strange.
is just Kim Kardashian's beige ass home.
Yes!
And all of her kids. Like, all I'm thinking about now is like Kim Kardashian's children. And I really hope they're doing okay after learning this information.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I don't know. Let's check back in with them when
yeah, but I was like one of the videos she did was of like the Noguchi Museum and the playground that they made for kids, and it just does not look fun at all. It's like just natural shapes. It looks like a modern art installation that's low to the ground for kids to crawl on, and it just doesn't look like fun. It's like this thing, and it's like this thing for parents to feel good about rather than for something for kids to play with.
You know what's so funny about that as well, kind of transitioning our conversation back to a space like a museum or a gallery. I used to work in a couple creative art making spaces that resided within a gallery space at separate institutions. And the stigma of those spaces was that they were kids spaces, right? And at galleries that I worked at, even some in Tulsa, I remember adults coming in and being like, hey, like clearly this is a kids museum. I want a refund. And having to have conversations about like, okay, just because the art is interactive and just because the creative zone caters to all ages and just colorful does not mean that this is a children's institution. And so that is also kind of interesting how we have those perspectives on the flip side as well. Like,
yeah, and even going back to Julie Alpert's sticker book, I didn't feel like that, like it's talking about her girlhood, but it was not like, I would not call it like a children's installation. There were signs all over saying, do not touch. Even though like I got a sticker book for $6 at the end of the tour, like, and I guess kids would probably find it really interesting, but they can't touch it. It's not interactive. So I feel like even with the monstrous eyes that are in the parts of her in some of the installations, I felt like it was trying to be like, it's hard to say whether it was like her installations are depicting her as an adult trying to go back to something more innocent and cute, but being unable to, or somebody who's like trying to grow up and being edgy about it. There's like, which way is it going? you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's kind of the almost a little bit of like the beautiful balance of her work. But I would argue that her work is very mature because she's looking back on her
Hmm.
girlhood from her adultness, right? From her adult perspective. So there is something inherently mature about looking back on your past experiences because that's only something that can happen, with time and with
Hmm.
age and maturity.
Um, speaking to all of these visuals, this is super fascinating. I am wondering, Erin, if you can talk with us about your process working with a visual artist whenever you're creating a work of literary art. What is that process of kind of sharing a type of vision for a cohesive project with another artist from another medium? How do you bring those two art forms to life to kind of create that cohesive final product?
Sure. So I've only done it once, but I'm about to do it again with my second book. So it's funny you should call them a visual artist because that's not really how I think of them, even though that's what they are. Um, so I work with, I don't work with them. I say I contracted the services of this self-publishing cover company called Meblart. Um, and I found out recently they're based in Ukraine. So of course with the war, it's kind of like up in the air about whether they're going to continue doing that right now. Um, just through the grapevine of what I've heard, they're going to continue doing that. But this was before the war. So when I worked with them, what I had to tell myself was that okay, I'm a writer. I know very little about book design. That is a whole field. And there are tropes and conventions with each genre, and I know what I like, but I am not like I don't know the language of this medium well enough to know or to like speak to creating something that's professional, that's quality, and that will drag readers in, and also signal to them what the genre of my book is. So I worked with them to say like, okay, so I know I want a book that's kind of in the style of like the old I don't know, like those old fantasy trilogies that maybe you've grown up on, like let's see, the Bartimaeus trilogy is one, Monster Blood Tattoo. Um, there's so many trilogies and series. The Harry Potter series, the Baudelaire's, a series of unfortunate events. That's it. So I wanted something in like the style of those books, which is kind of like it's very illustrative. It's very like there's gilt filigree all around the edges. The font is very like stylized. Maybe like if you hold it in the light, there'll be like a little gold reflection off the letters and stuff. Um, what I really wanted to do too is to have like one of those little fantasy maps on the inside cover so that readers can like open and see where the characters are in the story. I really wanted one, but I just didn't have the budget for it because that's a whole, you know, you can't get everything you want. But I would like to do that for the second book, so fingers crossed. Okay, so when I was talking with the illustrator, I was like, or the book cover designer, I said, okay, so what I would like to see on the cover is, here are some examples of book covers that I really like. Um, when I imagined my first book cover being is like the moment that Hattie, my protagonist, falls into the fountain, which will take her to the other world. And she did that. She illustrated it beautifully, but it seemed kind of empty. So she also added some other elements to kind of like play up the, what are the important objects in the book that have an impact on her life? Like there's antlers, there's roses. There's just like a little bit more of like there's a little bit more of like the soul of the book being depicted on the cover. And I really like those stylistic elements, even though we went back and forth a little bit about like the placement and like how I felt about certain things. Like one of the things that I really wanted was to have a number on the spine of the book because I always forget like which book in the series is like the one. so I really wanted that, and I got it. because I was the one paying for everything. And that's the beauty of self-publishing. If you want it, you get it as long as you have the money, or the skills, I guess, or the friends. I don't know. But it was definitely a learning experience and a learning curve. And next time that I do it for my second book, I'll be prepared. Um, but I would also like to eventually like branch out a little bit, because now I understand more about what goes into a book, and I have more opinions about how the books that I will self-publish should look and feel to a reader. Because I've done that, I've started to pay more attention to like the what do you call it, the design of the books, the typography, the things, and I've started taking notes about what I would like the second book to look like and the third. So it's more like self-publishing is interesting, right? Because usually when people get into it, they think like, oh, you know what? I don't know if traditional publishing is right for me. I want to do this. But normally when they start doing it, they've only been like a writer and working in this one medium. It's very rare for everybody to have like all the skills you need to make one book good. So you need to either hire other people, or you need to really learn it and get really good at it, or you just need to like you need to have friends who are willing to do it for free. So like working with people of different skill sets like make the book look professional was really like humbling, because it made me realize, maybe a writer isn't the right person to know when a book is ready to go out. So
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's also something this conversation seems like it's going back to, which is that encompassing experience of whatever the medium is. And for me, I noticed that when I don't like the paper of the pages of a book, it can really freak me out and it can like hinder my reading experience, because the paper texture, if it's that like silky smooth paper, I don't like it. But whenever it has like a little bit of texture to it, or a little bit of weight to the paper, I find that there's something a little just that brings the experience into a little bit more of that kind of physical space that you're in, even if it's just by yourself, that it just gives it that added element that makes you connect with it that much more. So I think it's really interesting to hear how all of that comes to life through this process beginning to end. There's so many people involved, but to have all of those um, different kind of pinpoints that not everyone thinks about when you're just saying, oh yeah, I wrote this book. It's like, no, I created a tangible experience for someone. um, so I think that's awesome.
So, Erin, and talking about kind of your review process on Book Talk, talking about book marketing, I think all of this comes down to a culminating question, which is kind of the summer being a big season for book reads. And I'm curious if you can share some best reads with our listeners, since we have, a critic in our midst. So we just need your hot
ooh.
takes.
Okay. So another thing I learned about TikTok is I read really weirdly for TikTok, because I feel like all the books that are talked about on TikTok are the things that just come out. And like, I don't. I go to the library, I browse, I pick out things that look good or that I'm interested in or that I hear other people talk about. And then I either reserve them at the library, or I like, if I really really want it, I pick it up. But I haven't done that in a while. So instead I have like my top favorites from my book review of books on writing and storytelling, and only one of them is brand new. So like, How to Tell a Story by the Moth podcast. This is really helpful, and this was the book that helped me realize, you can be a storyteller without being a writer, right? Which is obvious in hindsight, but at the time it was not. And they teach you like very simple rules to be a better storyteller. And they tell you how you can practice. And of course, the Moth will be coming to Tulsa on the 24th. They're doing a book signing at Magic City Books. So if somebody wants to go there and like pick up a book and like go figure out how you can be a better storyteller, that's a good book for you. But if you're a storyteller who wants to be a writer and you have a very poor grasp of language, um,
Become an artist.
become an artist. Or if you want to be a better writer, you can pick up Steven Pinker's book. When I was an undergraduate at the University of Chicago, there was this course called the Little Red Schoolhouse, and it's basically based off of how do readers read the written word? How do our brains understand English when it's written down? And when I picked up this book, I realized that a lot of the principles that were in that course, which was life changing, were in this book. So if somebody wants to be like an actual writer, then this is a good book for them. And of course, this one is kind of like my favorite, which is kind of like in between being a storyteller and being a writer. George Saunders' A Swim in a Pond in the Rain is where he dissects the short stories of Russian masters. And I feel like, going back to what we talked about earlier, I feel like short stories in English class, I feel like Russian writers, especially, they get like that symbolism picked apart because they like to be profound and wise and like they have fun with it. But that's not what he talks about in this book. When he talks about it, he talks about how they story tell and like what the elements of their work mean and how they make a story, how like the elements of a story in these stories work. So, and he does it like, this is how the medium of writing is used to storytell. Every medium has its own strengths and weaknesses, and here are some of the best short stories that he thinks are the best for showing off those strengths. So those are my picks.
Good picks. I happen to have a pick right here,
Oh no.
which happens to be the one and only E.C. Fuller's Perceiver book, which you so graciously gifted me. So it had to make a debut. It's making a gorgeous debut on my coffee table. It's been my coffee table book of the summer. I have just a lot of questions for you, and I have the privilege to be able to take you out for a drink after this lovely episode. But this is your book one of your young adult young adult fiction series. But in terms of any other work coming up before we let you go today, I just want you to be able to share anything exciting that maybe you can share with the Artpop Tarts today on the podcast.
Yeah, so I actually got a short story published just about a few weeks ago. It's called The Heebie Jeebie Beam, and it's a short story that anybody can find and read for free at Metaphorosis magazine. It's about a boy who discovers a ray gun in his father's workshop, and after playing around with it, he discovers that the ray gun when you shoot somebody with the ray gun, it causes intense fear, but also it causes intense relief. And he wants to uncover why his father created it, especially this thing that looks like a toy, because his father was a very serious person, and what it has to do with his father's disappearance. So it's like 6,000 words, totally free to read, and it's my recent favorite that I've read. As for stuff that's coming up, well, the second book is due to my editor at the end of Thanksgiving, so I'm really trying to get that finished. So I'm like 80% of the way through. I'm like in the home stretch. So and considering that I completely threw away like the previous manuscript and started again in August is crazy. So I've never written something this fast, and it's because I've like done all this reviewing of books on writing and storytelling, and done a lot of writing sprints that I'm able to knock it out. So knock on wood, and we'll see if I can do it.
Well,
We have total
I
faith
think
in
we have
you.
faith.
Thank you.
Completely so impressed by that statement. I just started over my novel like casually.
This is, what's the funny part? This is the third time I've done it too. Not for this book, but like for a different book.
Just in general, it's just
something
how
that you
I
do.
live my life.
it's like but the thing is now, once you find like the actual groove that you're meant to be in, it goes really fast. Some stories are like you grind them out because you just don't know how to make them better. But when you when I feel like because I've grown a lot as a writer and storyteller, the parts where I would just take weeks and months to just like I'd have to set it aside and like think about it a little bit, and I'd have to have like an epiphany to essentially get over that hump, and it would still not be great, but I'd have to work with it because that's the skill level where I was. But because I've grown so much, I can like look at something and see, oh, this isn't working because this thing that I can now specify and correct. So it's just like you if you read a lot and you write a lot and you practice hard, your practice will not betray you. And I think that's true for any medium that you work in.
Oh, well, Erin, it has been such a joy having you on the podcast today. I really feel as though that we need to have you back. If any listeners are interested in your process of self-publishing as well, I think that is a super interesting topic that we could certainly get into for another day. But Erin, what is your TikTok, and where can we find you on TikTok? Please share.
Yes. So I am on TikTok at Longhand Habits. It was the name of a really old blog that I started when I first started to like really take writing seriously. It no longer exists, but it lives on as my TikTok handle, Longhand Habits.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, at least your handle is memorialized and not the shitty photographer you worked for. So
Yes.
there, we've come full circle.
Small blessings.
Yeah.
Small blessings. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in for this episode. If you have any questions about today's episode or want to get in touch with Erin, you can email us at artpoptalk@gmail.com or find her on TikTok. And with that, we will talk to you all in 2 Tuesdays. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.